Right now in 2026, the average new car price in America is $52,000. And that's an all-time record, but it's one that has been shattered this summer and has stood since 2023. The average monthly car payment is $773, and 1 in 5 buyers are now signing up for $1,000 or more a month in a car payment. Nearly a third of people trading in their cars right now are underwater on that loan. And the number of borrowers falling behind on their loans right now is at a 32-year high. That's worse than the 2008 financial crisis. And as the years have gone by, the car industry that we all recognize has now shifted into something barely recognizable, and new car prices are no longer about finding a deal. The truth is, the car industry just isn't accepting reality right now, and it's about to become a serious problem if they don't find a way to address it soon. In fact, when we peel back the layers a little bit, we can answer the question, what happens when this all comes down? See, nowadays, we're so much more accustomed to seeing MSRPs and resale values go into the stratosphere, but this really wasn't always the case, especially if we go back to 2020. So let's go back to the last normal year for the automotive market, 2019. So I want you to imagine a younger, slightly less gray version of Sam. I had just graduated college, I had a super solid sales job lined up at a dealership nearby, and I was looking to buy my first car ever. Now at this time, we as the buyers had a much stronger upper hand compared to the dealers. I mean, yeah, cars were still expensive. In fact, in 2019, the average new car sale was $38,948, which was a 1.7% increase year over year and much higher than most buyers would like. But it was a balanced market that functioned with pretty relative consistency, and dealers were incentivized to get cars off the lot as fast as possible, so discounts were really expected and if not demanded. And since 2019 was actually the peak year for dealer discounts, it wasn't uncommon to shop through 3 to 4 dealers at the same time, pit them against each other, and have them fight it out for your business. I actually remember at one point when my parents were buying a brand new Honda Civic in 2018, my dad and I went out of our way to mess with the dealers just so we could get the lowest price possible. And somehow it worked because my parents ended up getting a few thousand off the base MSRP. And can you even imagine that happening today? No, because we don't live in that world anymore. And the way this is trending is screaming to me that if people don't start accepting the reality of the car market soon, this is all going to come crashing down, and things are definitely going to get interesting for people like you and I. So will I finally get to buy my beloved Mercedes SLS AMG for pennies on the dollar? Maybe, but let's hold on that thought real quick. Since 2015, the average price of a new car in America has skyrocketed from around $35,000 to $49,000 in 2026. So think about that. That's a 46% price increase in a decade. That's insane. Plus, these affordability problems are going way beyond the base price, because more than 20% of new car loans in 2025 were structured for 7 years or more. The average monthly car payments are still hovering around $722, and car ownership costs across the board have risen 48% since 2019. The thing is, on the used market, it's not like things are much better off. Let me give you a glimpse of what things are like today in case you haven't been keeping up with the market. Used car values are roughly 62% higher than they were before lockdown. A 10-year-old BMW M2 with 92,000 miles is still going for 33 grand. One of my boys, Tyler, he bought his 2016 M2 for 40 grand with only 32,000 miles a few years back. And so are you saying to me that he can drive another 60,000 miles and still lose only a few grand in value at worst? How does that make any sense? I'll give you another example because I'm really fired up about this. I've been waiting my entire life for people to get bored with the Mercedes SLS AMG so it would get cheap enough for me to buy it one day. Yeah, that was clearly a bad bet. And look, I know that I sound like I'm complaining, and yeah, I kinda am, but at the same time, I want you to think about it. Why are things like this? If you've got a dream car that suddenly seems a million miles away, 1, I'm right there with you, and 2, I figured out why none of this makes any sense. And here's the crazy thing. We've seen this before. Do you guys remember the sneaker market in 2018? If the car industry doesn't start accepting reality soon, it's gonna face the same fate as the shoe market. A bit of a flashback here. In 2018, I was a junior in college and I had just retired from lacrosse. I had zero money and a lot of free time. So I loved collecting sneakers and I decided to get a job at a Foot Locker in Dublin, Ohio. Now, I'll be honest, the job wasn't the easiest. Actually, the commute was almost an hour both ways, and with school, the job kind of kicked my ass. But it taught me 2 key things. 1, how to make a connection with anybody who walked through those doors, and 2, what people are willing to pay and do for something limited. Now, at that time, I was just trying to make ends meet and maybe afford a couple of groceries from Giant Eagle. So I ran a little sneaker resale business out of my dorm, and using the small amount of cash that I had, I would just use that as my revenue source and buy other sneakers sneakers and continue to try and resell and make a profit. And I would sell whatever I could through StockX from my college bedroom. Now, at the time, I wasn't making a lot of money, but the profits for flipping sneakers were wild at the time, even by modern standards. Do you remember how much a basic Yeezy used to cost back in the day? You could buy one of these things at retail for $300, which is insane, by the way, and then flip them on the open market for 2 or 3 times their retail price. Fast forward to 2026, and now everything's changed. In fact, just over 6 months ago, the sneaker resale market completely collapsed. And since then, the limited sneaker market is a full-on, complete shadow of itself. Let me give you an example. These are the We The Best Jordan 5s. Now, back in 2022, as wild as these things look now, these collabs were going crazy, and I thought that I was about to make some quick cash. I actually sold a pair of Jordan 3s to free up cash for these exact ones, thinking that it was so limited, it would resell for at least 2 or 3 times its retail price of $225. So I woke up early, I called my Sneaker Connect, and I secured one of the first available pairs on the market. But you know what happened? This thing fucking bombed. Nobody bought it. In fact, by the end of the day, you could just buy them on the site. A month later, still available, plenty of sizes, and now these beautiful things are worth $183. And me, being the real smart sneaker salesman that I was, I hung on thinking that, the price will come back eventually, and at some point, I'll make back my money. 4 years later, and I still have them. So anyway, let's get back to the real conversation here. Why would the sneaker market have anything to do with the car industry? And what does this mean for the car market? Can you and I actually buy our dream cars if we continue down this path? Well, sneakers and cars, they've got a lot of similarities. They're both assets that get treated like commodities with commoditized markets, where special editions and limited versions create hype-based markets. And they're also easy status symbols to rally behind, with expensive cars and sneakers always being pretty present in the influencer and music culture over the past decade. But really, if we zoom out, I think the downfall of the sneaker resale market shows us exactly what the car industry's downfall might look like in a few years' time. Because here's the thing, hype-based markets always die after an inciting event. And in this case, the death of the old car market started not really with the lockdown itself, but more with the semiconductor shortage that it caused. So at the end of 2019, there were roughly 3.5 million unsold new vehicles sitting in US inventory. And this meant that depending on the month, most dealers had 60 to 80 days of supply backlogged, and buyers had plenty of options to choose from. And so we, as the buying public, had a lot more power to influence the way that a deal went. But during the lockdown, semiconductor shortages vaporized the entire new inventory and takes those 3.5 million vehicles down to 1 million. And once that new car inventory fell and the news started blowing up about how bad the shortage was going to be, where do you think the panicked car buyers went? That's right, the used market. In 2019, the used market was pretty damn stable. With an average listing price of $19,500 across the board, used cars really weren't seeing the kind of speculative appreciation that we see today. In fact, unless you had something legitimately scarce, buyers essentially treated them as what they were, depreciating assets. You have a GT2 RS, all right, that's fair, that commands a premium. You got yourself a Ferrari Testarossa, totally valid, go ahead. A 3-year-old Toyota Tacoma with 108,000 miles on it, how the fuck is that still worth $25,000? Are you saying that I could buy this exact Tacoma from the same year, drive it 47,000 more miles, and only lose $7,000 in value, just like Tyler and his M2? That, again, doesn't make any sense at all, just like that $225 retail price for these neon nightmares. And just like we've seen in the sneaker market, when things stop making sense, the cracks really start to show. It feels like every couple of years or so, we discover a new speculation bubble that's just about to pop. We've had Beanie Babies, we've had sneakers, crypto, NFTs, Pokemon cards, Stanley water bottles, Labubu's, crumble cookies for some reason, all this dumb shit and so much more. And that's not even the half of it, because we're not counting that giant AI bubble that's looming over the entire US economy as we speak. But there was always a point where it came crashing down. Despite what some finance gurus might try to sell you, the number does not always go up. And right now, we're on the cusp of finding out what the car market is about to look like for the next few years. Right now, car manufacturers and buyers from across the planet are gathering 8 hours north of here for Monterey Car Week, where you get some of the biggest car auctions of the year taking place all in one spot. Think of it as the Monaco Grand Prix of the Western US. A lot of glitz, a lot of glamour, and some of the rarest cars on the planet all converging in Northern California to celebrate all things automotive. But in this case, we're thinking less about the cars. This time we're thinking about the money that moves through Monterey. For instance, in 2022, Car Week auction sales totaled up at over $470 million, which was setting a new record for the time. But weirdly enough, that's been the peak. In fact, since 2022, sales have stagnated, with a 15% drop in 2023 and a further 1.3% drop in 2024. 2025 was the only year that grew revenue, and the reason that happened was mainly because of the charity the Ferrari Daytona SP3 auction that accounted for over 6% of the week's revenue. Now, what does that mean? Does this mean that we can actually finally afford our dream cars now? Well, the bad news is no, at least not at the time of filming this video. But the good news is these patterns are cyclical, and I'll give you the actual answer here in a second. Now, I'm not the first YouTuber to guess that the car market will undergo some massive price collapse in the next few years. At this point, in fact, we're all basically just the dudes on the street corner with "the end is near" signs, and we're all screaming into megaphones hoping that someone will listen to us. The only reason we tell you this is because genuinely, I want you to think about this. How many times have we seen this film before over the past few years? Because once prices reach their dumbest level and no one buys into the hype, the cracks become canyons. Behind the scenes, it's been happening for years. We just never thought about it. For example, the Nissan Z, the "we the best fives" of the car industry. Both came out in 2022, both had some very high expectations and a much higher price than expected. And here's the thing, you probably haven't seen either of these out in the real world, because despite their hype, they both sat just waiting on their permanent home in a market that was not prepared to give them one. So to answer your question, can we finally afford our dream cars? As someone who's been in the markets where this pattern has taken place, I do think that you and I will be able to afford our dream cars if the car industry continues on this path. So maybe I don't have a specific conclusion to give you guys at this moment because the situation is still very much ongoing. But as someone who's watched the car and sneaker market closer than a BlackRock intern watches their tanked SpaceX options, something big is about to happen in the car world, and it all starts with Monterey Car Week. Oh, yo, you made it to the end of the video. So what do you think about where the car industry is at right now? Honestly, I think that this next couple weeks is going to define what the next couple of years look like. But the only way we're going to know is at the end of Monterey Car Week, and I promise you we'll be right back here with a wrap up to see how the market's looking, because hopefully we can just start being able to buy our dream cars at a reasonable price. There's no way this can continue the way it is. But if this is your first time here, welcome to McPeak Performance. I'm so glad you stopped by. My name is Sam. Please, if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button and comment below. Where do you think the car industry is at, and where do you think it's going to go after Monterey Car Week? Lord knows, we're going to find out together, but I feel really good about these next couple years for us. So hopefully a win's coming, but regardless, I'll see you guys in the next one. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Peace, folks. Bye.